we can't be more honored at the Milken Institute to have you join us tonight. And a person of conscience, a father of 6 children, 9 grandchildren, and an individual who is a light to many of us and the opportunities for the future of Malaysia, but not only that, a representative of how you should conduct yourself in the world today. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Terima kasih. Thank you, Mike and friends. It's of course a rare honor and privilege, particularly to be introduced by Mike Milken, who is of course more glamorous and successful in many ways, but we share the same experience. And we're quite determined, and without doubt adamant, and prepared to take the punches and struggle on. Now let me just briefly begin on the issue of globalization. I've always been rather cynical against the subject because we in Asia are familiar with the whole idea of globalization for centuries. Globalization is not necessarily introduced by the West since colonization. We see even India, China, even Malacca, small outposts in the peninsula. There was a major cosmopolitan, multiracial, multi-religious center, trade and investments in the traditional context, of course. But what's disconcerting to my mind now is what Herman Kahn referred to in the 70s, the growing sense of lethargy and trend towards dehumanization, beginning with political leadership. He referred to politicians and politics as uncharismatic, low moral profession. I don't know why I'm here. But we want to prove a point. I mean, he, I think, stated what was the trend. And this was the 70s. Can you imagine now? I don't want to mention presidents or whatever, it would be politically incorrect. But there's a deficit in democracy. There is a trend towards dehumanization of men and women. There is a level of concern other than normal pious platitudes and rhetoric on inequality and grinding poverty and gross inequality. But there is a lack of concern and concerted effort to deal with these issues. We talk about digital technology. Our concern is, first, that it will accelerate growth, yes, but then will also result in further degradation of men and women, dehumanize them, but more so will result in greater inequality. I'm not suggesting that we should do away with them, but I am just merely stating a fact that unless we, the elites, the business elite, the political elite, grasp these stark realities and address them, we will never succeed. So I am not particularly obsessed with growth figures and data, because I think when we deal with human beings, we should look at them as whole and individually. In Malaysia recently, we were at least given an initial shock when the UN economist Philip Ashton mentioned that the figure given on the state of poverty of 0.4% is absurd. because in reality, poverty is much more than that, because we use the PLI, the poverty line income of the Indian experience. Now it may be 15 to 20%, but we are talking about relatively vibrant economy, huge resources, oil, petroleum, gas, palm oil, industries. And to me, it does, speaking from my conscience, is unconscionable to have countries and societies growing at such a pace and tolerating poverty at that level. Gross inequality is known. I mean, it's popularized by Piketty, and prior to that, I think Galbraith and many other economists. But when you look at policy shifts, there's hardly any focus, concern to ensure that we deal with the issues of grinding poverty and inequality. Now, I'm saying this as a person who is very much involved in politics and who has struggled, and I'm determined to show that, to prove that politics is just not the art of persuasion and the concert of power, but also to ensure that there is a firm determination to run a country, relatively small country in this region, Malaysia, multiracial, multi-ethnic. We've gone through cycles of growth and stagnation, and known, unfortunately, in the last many years, to quote the economists, one of the worst case fiasco and malfeasance involving any government, that's the one MDB. But it's, of course, gross injustice to refer to Malaysia as a showcase for MDB and Goldman Sachs. This is a multiracial, multi-religious country. And we have never seen in recent times this phenomenal transformation, decision of the masses, Muslims and Christians and Hindus and Buddhists and enemies, given a semi-autocratic, a semi-authoritarian scenario, choosing to defend their rights and their freedom and choose democracy. So for those who believe that democracy is something alien to our societies, should learn from the tribes in Sarawak and the rural folks and those in the hinterland, because they understand and value what is freedom, what is right, what is human dignity. So, therefore, to conclude, I am saying all this because I think I don't only need to appeal to you, but to get you to appreciate that this change that have taken place, which I said is phenomenal transformation, choosing democracy, taking the risks, and wanting the country to succeed. Because we have problems. There's growing fascism, jingoism in the West and also in Malaysia. But I believe that reason will prevail, and I survive because I trust in the wisdom of the masses. So it's nothing peculiarly unique to the Americans when they believe in Jeffersonian ideals. I, coming from rural Malaysia, seems to share those ideals, that we are here to protect human dignity. So, whilst I am appealing to you to support this endeavor, the transition government under Tun Mahathir, can you imagine? This is post-normal times. Anwar working with Mahathir. anyway, there was this understanding, and for now I give him the space and latitude to conduct the affairs under this turbulent period of this transition, embarking on the initial reforms of the judiciary, of the media, but more importantly, the economic reforms. Countries are Asian countries, from the days of Guna Myrdal's Asian drama, is blatantly corrupt. And as you have seen in my MDB, it's not only the Prime Minister, but also Goldman Sachs. So it takes a lot of courage and conviction and tenacity of purpose to ensure that we do govern ethically, responsibly, and undertake reforms, beginning with economic reforms. Because you're not able to propel the economy upwards. Make Malaysia attractive enough for domestic and foreign investments and propel the economy, then it is quite difficult, challenging to protect and distribute and ensure that the vast majority of our people benefit through better quality education, better public health services, etc. But, and to do that, we must be prepared to do whatever it takes, whatever is necessary, deemed necessary, transparently, procedurally correct, to attract the best minds, irrespective of race. And this is important in the Malaysian context because for the last 40 years, we've been talking about an economic policy has some bearing to race, the new economic policy. And I thought this need to be dismantled. I'm not saying this just this year. I crafted the new Malaysian economic agenda in 2007 against the advice of many of my colleagues, particularly Mother Malays, because they say it is very difficult to convince the Malays, or the vast majority are poor, although they're the majority, to dismantle an obsolete economic policy based on race to be replaced by an economic policy based on need. But that's secondary to the fact that we need to propel the economy upwards. That, having said that, I would certainly then welcome you to Malaysia, just 30 minutes away, 20 minutes away by road to Johor, 1 hour to Kuala Lumpur, and 1.5 hours to Port Dickson, where I represent the constituency. So thank you again, and I think Haslinda will have to take her turn to crush me to pieces.
Dato Seri, I'm here, please. So, Dato Seri, you said you're giving Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad the space and latitude to fix what needs fixing. I mean, some say we introduce you as the Prime Minister in waiting, and some say you could be waiting forever. I mean, what makes you so sure you are going to be the 8th Prime Minister of Malaysia?
I happen to be one of the most patient political leaders the world have recorded. I have been known as the next Prime Minister or Prime Minister in waiting since 1999. So waiting for a few more months or years is not in question.
There is a date. You talked about that agreement. Nobody really knows whether it's binding, what the agreement entails. Give us a sense of when exactly you think you will take over power.
You know, you're not trying to create problems for me.
No, just to put it in context for those who have not been following, Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad has said 2 years, 2.5 years, 3 years, and then he says, maybe.
Well, the issue is not Mahathir or Anwar. In January 2018, 5 months before the elections, the coalition of Pakatan Harapan decided to craft this consensus, this formula. There became a consensus accepted by all parties that in the event we win the elections, then Mahathir will be the Prime Minister, Aziza, Deputy Prime Minister. So I have, my boss is Aziza. Oh my God.
In and out of politics.
Yes. Now, and then got released, contesting the by-elections, and Anwar will take over. And that's all signed by the party leaders. But the more important, why I'm not saying that it is just Mahathir and Anwar, in our system, democratic system, the member of parliament that enjoys the support of the majority of MPs will be chosen as a prime minister. Right now, the understanding of all these MPs in the parties is that Mahathir will be the prime minister and Anwar will be the next. So it's settled.
So that's May 2020.
Well, 2 years is May 2020, but I see around about just, no hurry.
So 100% confident, right?
I have time to, meet Mike and the rest in a relaxed manner, not too much protocol.
There has been political infighting within the party. Names have been thrown around, Mahathir's son, Mukhriz, your own deputy, Azmin Ali, who's also been named as possible 8th Prime Minister of Malaysia.
Name me one party in the world, except in North Korea, where you don't have some sort of differences. Or they are. But then there was a test recently among the party leadership. 90% of local leaders that constitute the 200 over branches support me as president and the next prime minister. So it's not, to me, essentially it's not an issue. Whatever the differences we have within a party or intra-party, we have the vast majority, and the majority members of parliament choosing me as the next prime minister. So it's not my decision or Mahathir's decision.
Signed, sealed, delivered. Are you ready? I mean, you spent 10 years in jail. When you were released and pardoned, it's a different world. When you went in, there was no such thing as WhatsApp, Instagram.
Artificial intelligence, big data,
yes, exactly.
IoT.
And I remember when you were released, I was at your home, and I said, what is Anwar Ibrahim's phone number? And your system was saying, we're still trying to figure it out because we're trying to put all the apps in right now, and we're not even sure whether he can access them. So it's a completely different world. Are you ready? Because you talk about how you want to lift your people out of poverty. Are you in touch with your people, and how will you do that?
Well, I'm not too mediocre, so I pick up very fast. I took a lot of time. I meet the startups, I meet the IT companies, listen to the experts, read all the reports. Mike promised to send me 1,000 words or page report, I'm not sure. But I spent all the time. What do you do in the 10.5 years? Read. From Shakespeare to Dostoevsky, from Stiglitz to Piketty, from Aurobindo, Sri Aurobindo to Kishore.
What were some of the takeaways from the books you read that's going to help you to be the Prime Minister of Malaysia?
Be human and humane. Politics, in final analysis, is just not about power. It's about integrity, about legacy, and about defending the rights of your people, the common man and woman. I think I have so much passion. I've talked about freedom, democracy, all those years, decades. But I think experiencing unfreedom and experiencing gross injustice and looking at the judges with no backbone and how the media manipulate facts, then you learn. You see, look, this happens to Anwar, fair. I mean, we have many friends, but there are many others who had to endure this without any recognition. So I think it's my task to make sure that now that I went through this difficult Chinese road, I don't want any other Malaysian, Malay, Chinese, Indian, Iban, Kadazan to suffer the same fate.
You talked about how you will do whatever it takes. What exactly is that? I mean, what policies are you willing to put in place? How deep are you willing to go? How far are you willing to go?
One is, of course, to dismantle the new economic policy.
How soon can that happen?
It should be immediate. But you need to explain. I mean, we tend to be condescending. You know, in Asia, we are very familiar with leaders, very condescending. We know the best, we know what's right, that's it. No, but we have to address. You got to go down and engage with people. If you talk about democracy, you talk about freedom, you talk about humanity, you have got to deal and explain to them. The Malays are concerned, some are quite genuinely concerned, because, as I said, poverty, up to 15, 20%. A vast majority are Malays, or pockets of Indians in the estates and Chinese in the urban squatters. So you have to allay their concern, their fear, that this policy, this radical change or paradigm shift will not be at their expense. In fact, in the name of justice and compassion, they, in a transparent manner, ridding the country of endemic corruption, we will be able to secure them a better living standards and conditions.
By the time you take over as Prime Minister, you'll have 3 years, 3.5 years at most. Do you think you can win back that trust? I mean, the Malays form the majority of the people, and you have said before, in fact, when you were released from prison, you did say that we need to win back the trust of the Malays because they're not convinced that this coalition is going to work, that this coalition will be good for us.
It's not all that negative or bad, because we lost in some by-elections, but we also won, including the seat I contested, and we won handsomely. I mean, vast majority of the Malays, the Chinese, the ethnic Indians, and some indigenous tribes, the 3 villages there, gave such a commanding lead. So I don't think we should underestimate their capacity. They are a bit frustrated because they have to deal with bread and butter issues. Not just language or religious issues or hudud, whatever they're talking about, but bread and butter issues. That's just, to my mind, we have to be realistic, to accept the fact that you want the reform to be effective, meaningful, you must start by energizing the economy and making it work. I mean, how do you then deal with it, with the resources that we have, with the debts that we have? Is to attract back domestic investments and foreign investments. There's a huge potential in tourism. There is need to enhance the capacity in digital technology, enhance education standards, language proficiency, beginning with Bahasa Malaysia, English, and our advantage is because we have a segment of our people who master Chinese and Tamil. So I look at it as an advantage, not divisive.
Will English be the language of choice in schools? Because currently there's a debate whether it should be English, whether it should be Bahasa Malaysia. I mean, when you become Prime Minister, education, would that be a priority? And would English be the language of choice?
Yeah, we talk about democratization of access to quality education. That's number one. Language, of course, the national language is Bahasa. We need to have Malaysians having some level of proficiency in the national language. Having said that, English is so important. You want to succeed, you have to have a very good command of the English language. Where some may choose Arabic or Chinese or Tamil, fair, we should encourage them. I don't think it is a zero-sum game. To me, as long as you accept the national language, you also accept the importance, the primary importance of the English language. Otherwise, we will lose out. And we in this competitive world and a globalized world, we talk about globalized world, I mean, how do you interact? How do you engage with the rest? It's through the international language, English, for now.
What role will government-linked companies play in your government? Because currently we've seen changes at the leadership level. Do you expect further leadership changes when you come to power? And also currently there's a lot of reliance on government-linked companies for revenue. I mean, Petronas is kind of forced now to pay a higher dividend to the government because of the money needed to spend on infrastructure and so on and so forth. I mean, what kind of policies will you be adopting where government-linked companies are concerned?
The private sector must take the lead. It's not the business of government to be in business. But there are probably historical antecedents and the requirement, for example, I would say leave Petronas out of the picture, but then there are thousands of other GLCs. Some are completely irrelevant, some can be managed by the private sector and must be done so. And there has been some moves. If we privatize, we should privatize in a very transparent manner to make sure that we can sustain this business and give all the support and encouragement required.
Before I open the discussion to the floor, you're welcome to ask questions later on. Just one question. How does it feel to be on the cusp of being the next Prime Minister of Malaysia? Because when you stood for election back in 2013, people were saying that, you know, this is your final bid. And here you are, 6-7 years later, that close. How does it feel to be that close to being the Prime Minister?
I remember this great song, So Near Yet So Far Away. Now, well, that's past. In 2013...
You're not angry with what happened?
No, I mean, I was discussing with Mike, we should be able to forgive.
The 10 years were not wasted?
Well, I read a lot. You can discuss with any Harvard professor from Indian philosophy to economics, and that's good. And I would have been able to do that had I not been sent to prison. Now, having said that, look, we have to move on. People ask me, do you really forgive Mahathir? I mean, look, he did his part. I mean, you can't deny the fact that he did contribute in the last phase of this change to unseat Najib in the last general elections. But between your own personal predicament, the sufferings that you have to endure for more than a decade, and the interest of the nation, the interest of the nation takes precedence. I don't have a choice. So you must be able to forgive. Otherwise, it's the disease of the heart. You know, you should enjoy. I'm happy. I'm a happy man. You know, you talk about prison. I can joke about it. The songs I sang. So I remember all these lyrics because I was in prison.
Your favorite book and your favorite song?
No, of course, Shakespeare remains still the best compendium, unrivaled in the English language. Others, of course, as a Muslim, I do read the Quran. You see, I got to be politically correct. Because otherwise, some from the Islamic party say, look, Anwar has forgotten the Quran. He says Shakespeare is the main reference. Oh my God. No, but the novels, you see novels, the great writers from Boris Pasternak to poems of Anna Akhmatova to, I mean, even great Indonesian writers and philosophy, religion. I mean, these are great works. And whilst I'm not saying that there was no gross injustice against me, it's a major crime. Of course, I lost this prime time with Aziza and the children and the grandchildren later. But you always look at the positive side. Finally, you have to decide what is best for the ideas you believe in. And best is to move on and forget the past, forgive the excesses of the past. I was in Sabah, incidentally, last Sunday. I met the former speaker who suspended for 6 months. 6 months for taking up an issue against Najib. Then he came, he was so remorseful, asking me to meet with his family, and there were 10,000 crowd, and he did apologize. And I said, please, Mr. Speaker, we move on. And he was visibly very touched. He said, are you sure? I said, look, I wouldn't have come to your house and have lunch. I was still bitter about what happened. But you still committed a major crime. But it's done. We move on. And I think, I'm not mincing words, because I think and I believe the country must take precedent.
And look forward to May 2020. Let's take the first question from the floor, please. Is that Kishore?
Oh,
Are you ready for this question?
yeah, I think there are notes for his next book.
Anwar, good to see you. Good to see you in such good health. I wish you great success in your next assignment, which we now know what it is. But as you know, you're going to take on the job in a very challenging geopolitical environment. There's absolutely no question that in the next 10 years, the rivalry between the United States and China will rise. There's no doubt about that. There's also no question that the ASEAN region will be the most vulnerable to US-China tensions, because among the 10 of us, there are some that are more pro-China, there are some that are more pro-America, and there's a real danger that ASEAN could be divided and torn because of the US-China rivalry. So when you become Prime Minister, what would you do to save ASEAN?
That is for the Institute of South Asian Studies to answer. Now, now, there are, of course, serious ramifications to the economy in this region due to the trade war between China and America. But you also know that there are also opportunities. And we have to look beyond the immediate problems to elicit whatever benefits we can obtain. The Vietnamese have done remarkably well in this sense, and I think Malaysia in the past years have been rather slow responding. We're just talking about the problem. Okay, I'm more optimistic, because I think if we can garner the best brains within the country and with international support, we can drive things forward. Now, resources, yes, we have lost a lot, but due to leakages and corruption. I mean, look at the national scenario. I'm talking about $10, $20 billion that can be brought back into the economy if we can rid the country of corruption and the leakages in the system. I talked about poverty just as an example. Notwithstanding the trade war, etc., we spent about 26 to 28 billion ringgit a year to help ease this problem, which is quite remarkable, whether it's under Mahathir in the past or Najib or now. It's phenomenal, the amount. But the leakages is also phenomenal. So back to the issue of governance. So we in ASEAN need to really look at the whole idea of governance. Look at this haze. I consider this ecological warfare. Millions affected, thousands of schools closed, and millions of ringgit have to be spent by the common folk to buy some pills and eye drops and masks. And governments are not even to work together and resolve this. And the influence of the big conglomerates are so powerful. They're registering 800 million, 1 billion ringgit profit, but still not able to spend 20, 30 million to help ease part of the problem. I think again is the issue of governance. I am optimistic because in the sense that if you can get the governments in ASEAN to really look at it. Now, if they don't, then there must be this sense of outrage among the public, because it's affecting millions of people, Singaporeans, Indonesians, Malaysians. I mean, of course, it's not blame game. Some say Indonesians are at fault, but the Malaysian companies involved, and Singaporeans have lost shares there. So all the three must partly shoulder the blame. And just do something. It's an example. But we are in ASEAN. I mean, I agree, I share your concerns that apparently there's some being problems. Not just because of the trade war, which I don't believe is going to adversely affect the relationship. Because relations between ASEAN countries tend to be really, acceptable. We hope, for example, sort of better working relations with Malaysia and Singapore.
It's always water.
Water. But having said that, I mean, what you have said is right. That means we must caution leaders because ASEAN must remain a formidable force for peace, for security, for economic enhancement, progress. But we tend to be more successful in terms of securing peace, although we've been quite miserable or utter failure when dealing with the issues in Myanmar, for example. And I think this is unconscionable again, that ASEAN, with this force, with the level of influence, can do this much to resolve part of the problem. From the days of Aung San Suu Kyi to the Rohingyas. And the junta seems to be just incorrigible. So there are challenges for ASEAN. But I think reason must prevail, that finally ASEAN will realize that their future must not be ever determined by China or United States. And the best way forward for them is to engage with both great nations and great economies, and for our own survival and economic success, we need to maintain good, cordial, and excellent relations with both the East and the West.
I'll take a question on the right side, please.
Hi, thank you both so much for a really engaging and excellent discussion. It's an honor to have you here, Anwar. My name is Michael Swido. I'm an author and writer. I want to follow up on something you just said. You said that the haze is ecological injustice and warfare, and you mentioned that Malaysian companies are partly responsible. So I'd like to ask you, what action would you take against Malaysian companies or Malaysian CEOs who are partly responsible for this haze?
Well, once it's established, either by the Indonesian authorities or Malaysia and Singapore, that these companies are involved, then they should be hauled up and be accountable. If their burning has happened, then at least provide enough resources to help ease the problem and not leave it entirely to the government. And governments also cannot be in the state of denial. All natural phenomena, blame God, Blame God for the forest fires. But you've been blaming God for the last 2 decades. And God cannot be that cruel. You see? But because you identify, that is also the creation. For example, oil palm estates in the peat soil area. And the peat soil is the highest emission of carbon from the peat soil. Why on earth do we continue to allow this? And this is nothing to do with the soya bean lobby or United States or Europe. It doesn't, nothing to do. It's just our own survival. So I would suggest certainly we have adequate laws. And we just hold up, and they must be held accountable. I mean, millions are suffering, and you just can't say that, well, we have to study and make the necessary measures so that it will not recur the next year. It has been there. That's my humble view. Not too popular with these conglomerates.
We'll take a question from the middle side of the room. There's one. Sorry, can't really see. Is there? If there isn't, we'll go back to, there was a hand there.
Thank you. If you think of the time before you went away and you have a picture of the world in your mind and the world that you're seeing today, what is the one thing that strikes you the most?
Trump. I said, we are living in post-normal times. I remember Gore Vidal, the great novelist, who wrote Armageddon and other essays. I think that was, and he was talking about, okay, he's very critical of Ronald Reagan those days. He said he cannot understand the Americans. They're astute, they're intelligent, most educated, and they can still elect a president who is this. I will not add. That was before he knew Trump. That's why, Mahathir was right in one thing. I was never made a foreign minister. I'm not diplomatic at all. Yeah, so... So the media, please don't report this, right? Don't believe them.
I see a hand in the middle there. Just over here, please, microphone.
Hi, Dato. Good to see you in good health. For the past 10, 20 years, I think one of the big challenge for Malaysia is there's a lot of Malaysians who are very talented, but they have left the country and migrated to almost every part of the world and become somebody contributing to economy. What's your plan of trying to maybe bring back some of these talented Malaysians to help develop the country again? So that's my question.
I've met a number of Malaysians in Australia, States, here in Singapore, who just, relishing to go back and serve. So it is the task of the government and also the private sector to work and entice them. It's not necessarily a waste for them to work elsewhere to gain the experience and exposure. Two of my children, of course, in the States. But I think the initial exposure is important. I don't think it's a loss. Some of our best minds or best brains in California, for example, wouldn't have made it that way had they been in Malaysia because of the opportunities. So, but now I think you're right. It is time for us in this period where their expertise is much required to attract them and come back to serve the country. I've talked to a few of them, even as if for the first initial years. And many of them are very, very enthusiastic and cherished to go back home. What we need to do, and some have returned actually, but incidentally, you must know that. But there must be a concerted effort, and I think we need to do more.
We'll take one more question if there is one. Thanks.
Anwar, thank you. Joe Brock with Reuters. I'm going to ask you a question which is the most common question that I'm asked as a journalist. Haslinda has obviously put very eloquently about there's some ambiguity with what Tun Mahathir says about the handover. And I think the question I get asked most often is, what will happen if there is no handover? If there is a drift and no handover seems to be in place, what action will you be able to take?
I think to Mahathir's credit, he has tried to navigate this difficult period, taking into account of the reform or reformasi agenda. You remember, reformasi 98, essentially a critique or major attack against Mahathir. And I think it takes a lot of courage on his part too, to acknowledge the fact that the country has to move on and change. Now, why was he deemed to be rather ambiguous? Because it's quite embarrassing for him. For every single session he has with the media, they will ask, when are you going to surrender power? It's quite embarrassing for him. I do appreciate it. I was there once with him, and they asked him, when? Are you sure? He said, yes. When? He said, the right time, of course. And because once he announced the specific time, then he will be considered a lame duck prime minister. And he said he had experienced that in the past when they announced the time requirement. But as he has said, it's up to me and Anwar to try and work out the dates and the programs, and I'm quite happy with it. I have no reason to question his sincerity, and he also knows the feeling and the sentiments of the party leaders. So I don't believe it's ambiguous. He's been very consistent to suggest that Anwar will take over. But sometimes he say, well, no, after 3 years, 2 years. That's Mahathir. You can't change him at 94. But the fact that he has made no ambiguity in terms of a transition, that this is a transition government, that Anwar will take over. That has been consistently and been saying for the last 1.5 years. But I think, I don't believe it is also fair to him to keep on harping, knowing that it's going to be next year. We say, when are you going? When are you going? Tell us when. I mean, I think, inshallah, God willing, it will happen. And be patient. I'll try and consider giving you an interview.
That will have to wait after Bloomberg, of course. Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim, just before we let you go, just very quickly, this morning we talked about the American dream, the Asian dream. What's the dream you have for Malaysia? What would you like to achieve in your time as Prime Minister of the country?
Multiracial, multireligious country that's peaceful, that economically vibrant, that is, which is, I think, a great feat. Democratic, strong passion for freedom and humanity. And this is to be a classic case of how a multiracial society should behave. Not the parochialism and racism that's proving in many parts of the world. We want to prove the point that different races, different creed, different religion does not necessarily weaken our resolve. And I believe that we are able to achieve that. And not me alone, but many of us, the elites and also the rural leadership who share these views, and they must take, have the courage to articulate this and move throughout the urban and rural centers to encourage people to move on. But again, I think this all would happen if we could sustain the growth scenario and the economy. Because when there's growth, poverty, as I said, and unemployment, graduate unemployment, there will be a lot of frustrations. So bread and butter issues must be taken into consideration. Ideals and philosophical treaties is not enough. So we will have to be realistic enough to focus on the economy, which means excellent bilateral relations with our neighbors, strong ASEAN, and a clear policy that will be able to attract Malaysia as a destination for investments.
Malaysia's Prime Minister in waiting, Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim, thank you so much for your time today.